or that you have done rather, that you're gonna leave by the wayside. That's what Kabbalah al Asid means. It means I'm accepting, I'm committing that in the future I'm going to leave this behind. And we all know that this can be a very difficult thing to do. This can be a really, really tough point to make and a really tough action to take. And that's a lot of times that's where the hopelessness and guilt, the guilty feelings come from. So part of what I want to do tonight is I want to talk about, first of all, I want to talk about exactly what Teshuva is, because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about what the end-all be-all of Teshuva really is, and understanding what the real focus of it is can help people kind of come to terms with some of those guilty feelings, possibly, hopefully. I'd also like to talk a little bit about how it works and understanding the mechanics of it. Obviously, these are things these are the Rumai Shalom, these are the things that are, they're very lofty concepts, but understanding them on some level, the mechanics of how they work in a spiritual way, will hopefully also help us to feel a little bit better about the entire process in general. And then we're going to talk a little bit about practical steps, which, as I mentioned before, maybe some people didn't join us then, but as I mentioned before, there are some practical things that we may be able to do in order to make the Kabbalah al Asid factor at least a little bit simpler.
If you make looking.
I'm sorry? Did somebody say something? Okay. Yeah, just to reiterate, if people are able to put comments into the chat, I try to incorporate them, but it's hard. I know for me as a presenter, it's hard for me to hear people making comments and respond to them in a way that actually makes sense. So the best way to do it really is to put it into the chat. And as I said before, people who want to ask specific questions, either if we have time afterwards or if we have time after the presentation itself or even after the meeting is over, feel free to email me, or we can do a question and answer session towards the end if we have time. So basically, before we get into practicality, we're going to discuss exactly what Teshuva is and how it really works. So this misconception that we mentioned is that the whole point of Teshuva is just to get rid of Averas, right? There's a concept called an Avera. It's like you did something wrong, and that kind of muck builds up on your soul, and Teshuva is the way that you scrape it off and you move forward. Obviously, that's not untrue. Obviously, that's not an untrue point. Averas do something along those lines, if you want to use that kind of analogy. But there's a much deeper aspect to it. The word teshuva means return. Literally, it means return. Now, the famous question, which is asked by pretty much anyone who discusses the topic of what teshuva is, well, where are you returning to? Theoretically speaking, if it were just a matter of removing Averas, we could call it something like tikkun or takanas, fixing it up. This is not just a matter of fixing it, this is returning. So we have to start to kind of understand where we're returning to and how we get there. Like that's an important thing to understand. I mean, if that's what we're calling the name of the mitzvah itself, which it is, it's a mitzvah. If that's what we're calling the mitzvah, then that presumably is kind of integral to what the mitzvah is. So it's always worth looking at Ali Shor of Shlomo Volva. It's always worth looking at his farm, and particularly in this respect, he talks about in Ali Shor Beis, Chelik Beis, he talks about exactly what the definition of teshuva is. So the way he understands it is that it's not just a matter of correction; it's a matter of recognizing, of gaining a clear recognition of Hashem and the role that Hashem plays in our lives. He says that the main point of it is to attain a certain level of hakara, of recognition of Hashem. And all the halachas, all the different details of how to do teshuva, and again, the Rambam goes pretty long about that stuff. I mean, he has several prakim talking about all the different details of how to do teshuva and what things you need to do, teshuva need to be done for. But those halachas are all a roadmap that presumably, and if done properly, will lead a person to that greater level of recognition of Hashem. So we have it, and there are four main steps, which pretty much anybody who's been through elementary school, the yeshiva elementary school system will know them. There are a few steps. You have charata, which loosely translated means regret. You have vidoy, which means acknowledgement, or verbal acknowledgement. You verbalize to Hashem, this is something that I did. And you have azivas hachet and kabbalah asid. There's abandonment of the chet itself, of the aver that's done, and there's the commitment to not repeat in the future. And as I mentioned before, we're really going to be working more with the Kabbalah al-Ha'asid factor, but the other factors may come up as well. So if the point is to grow closer to Hashem, the point is to strengthen your connection and to recognize Hashem's presence in our lives and in the world, then logically, Teshuva is not about guilt. Teshuva is not about being a good or a bad person. It's certainly not about putting ourselves down and feeling bad and feeling shamed. It's about improvement. It's supposed to be a positive experience. It's supposed to be an experience which builds people up. Teshuva is a way to bring yourself closer to Hashem if it's done properly. It's not a way to tear yourself down and make yourself feel miserable. There's obviously part of it is charata, as we said, part of it is regret, but that doesn't mean that you're beating yourself up for things. It's an acknowledgement. This is something that I did wrong, and this is something that I wish I had not done. It doesn't mean that a person is a bad person or that a person is terrible because they did an aver or because they have to go through this step of charata. So that's just an idea of what teshuva is on a slightly deeper level. How does it work? So this is the part which gets a little interesting, or a little more interesting, as if it wasn't interesting enough already. This is the part that really gets interesting. The ultimate goal of teshuva, as we said, is to become closer to Hashem and to return to Him, so to speak. And this obviously isn't talking about physical distance. If we're talking about physical distance, then, well, it can't be, because it just can't be. It's not the world we live in. Hashem is not a physical being. Physical distance can't apply. So what does closeness mean? What are we returning to? How does that relate? So to understand what closeness means, let's take a look at what distancing ourselves from Hashem is. In this week's Parsha, or this Parsha Hazinu, there's a pasuk that says, Tzur Yiladcha Teshi. It says, the rock that bore you was forgotten. And the Mefarshim explained, Tzur, the rock that bore you, refers to Hashem. Teshi means forgot. Rashi brings down a very interesting medrash over there. And there's a glaring question when you look at this medrash. The medrash says, Tzur Yiladcha Teshi, not that you forgot the rock that bore you, you weakened the rock that bore you. You weakened his ability to be mashpia type. You've weakened his ability to bestow goodness upon you, to give bracha on you. Now, the glaring question that raises itself as well, if Hashem is the all-powerful and Hashem is Hakol Yachol, He does everything, how are we capable of weakening Hashem's ability to give good? I think it's a very basic question. Pasuk says that we weaken Hashem's ability to give good, according to this medrash. How are we doing that? I mean, that puts us in a pretty powerful position. In order to answer that question, let's think about how Hashem actually goes through with that. How does Hashem give bracha to the world? If you look, there's a sefer called B'Samim Rosh, which it's a pirush on the siddur. And in his Hakdama, he talks a little bit about tefillah, about what the point of tefillah is, how it works, how it doesn't work. One thing that he mentions, which I think is very, it puts things in perspective. Hashem doesn't change. When we're davening for something, when we're asking Hashem to do something for us, it's not that Hashem is changing His mind. Hashem doesn't change. Hashem is not an individual who exists within time, within space, that He's governed by was, will be, is. Hashem just is everything. Hashem is beyond time. So there's no change. Hashem is a constant. Everything that Hashem was with relation to the world 5,000 years ago, He is now. And He will be tomorrow and the day after and however many hundreds of years afterwards also. So Hashem does not change. The way Hashem bestows bracha on the world, the way He gives bracha to the world, is that there's a constant outpouring of bracha. Now, think about it like this. Let's say a person leaves a faucet on, right? A person leaves a faucet on, and then you put a pitcher about 10 inches away from where the faucet is. That's not going to catch the water, right? It's just not. Let's say you use a flour sifter to try to catch the water. You're not going to catch any water. You're using a vessel which is not capable of catching water. Very loosely speaking, it's very similar with people. The bracha is constantly coming down to the world. The bracha is constantly available to us. It's a matter of us putting ourselves in a position in a way that can catch it. It's a matter of us being the vessel which can catch the water that's coming out, so to speak. Another analogy that I like to use is you have a laser emitter. Let's say you have a laser emitter, and your lens is improperly focused. So that's going to change the way the light looks. That's going to change where the beam goes. That's going to change if the beam goes. Let's say you take the lens away. That's going to totally mess up the laser beam. You're not going to get that laser if your emitter is not properly focused by a lens. So we as people, we are the focus, we're the lens that is able to focus the bracha that Hashem is constantly sending down to the world. And it's always there. That hashpa'as bracha is constantly going down to the world from above, I guess we could call it for lack of a better term. There are ways for us to improve our standing. There are ways for us to make ourselves more capable of catching that bracha than we would have been otherwise. One way that we can make ourselves more capable of catching that bracha is by doing avodas Hashem, by doing mitzvahs, by learning, by davening, by keeping the 613 mitzvahs that Hashem gave us as kind of a user manual to the world, right? Hashem designed the Torah. The Torah is an expression of Hashem's chachma, and we understand that. And we're able to translate the Torah into specific mitzvahs and specific commandments, which teaches us how to use the world in a way which enables us to catch that bracha. That's what the Torah is. That's what mitzvahs are. And Averis, mitzvahs leisase, is exactly the same thing. It's a thing. It tells us what to avoid if we want to be an appropriate vessel to catch that bracha. So doing Averis moves the lens. Doing Averis takes the lens out of focus, and it makes us that we're less capable of catching that bracha. So what comes out of all of this is that doing Teshuva, which is an act of removing those Averis, as we mentioned before, puts us back into focus. It puts us back directly under that faucet. It puts our lens, or the lens which we are, directly into the outpouring of the bracha that Hashem is constantly sending down. Hashem doesn't change. We change. We move our picture. We move the laser lens, whatever analogy you like better. They're both good. However you want to work it, it's up to us to make those changes because Hashem is the constant. Hashem does not change and by definition cannot change in any way that we can possibly understand. So when we're doing Teshuva, that's what's happening. So a couple of things that come out of this is that the idea of doing Teshuva, even if you end up going back to whatever it was that you were doing, even if you end up going back, like day after Yom Kippur, boom, you're right back at it. But if you do a proper Teshuva on Yom Kippur, you have moved your lens back into focus. And that in itself has intrinsic value. That in itself is something which is good. And it's something which you've accomplished something. Again, even if you move right back out of focus the day after, because you had that one day of being completely in focus. Now, the problem with this, going back to what we mentioned before, is Kabbalah al-Ha'asid, is accepting whatever it is that you need to do in the future. In order for it to be a valid Kabbalah al-Ha'asid, you kind of have to have a plan in place. I mean, there's the old saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different...
Yeah.
The definition of insanity, we said, is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for...
I told you Dovey Melson's daughter going.
And I'm sorry, if whoever that is could...
Do you want to wish him how's that? She just texted me.
Okay. So the idea being that if we're able to make some sort of a plan, if we're able to do something properly and come out with a specific plan that makes sense and is doable, it's sustainable, that's a viable Kabbalah al-Ha'asid that we can point to and say, okay, this is my Teshuva, this is what I've done. So let's talk a little bit about practicality. I sent out a sheet, and it might be worth it for people to have the sheet with them just to refer back to it. As we get to the part where we specifically address the questions, I'm gonna bring it up on the screen. So let's talk about making a plan for this is where the therapist part of it comes in. Let's talk about how we make a plan to make real behavioral change, to make a real change in the way we do things. In order to understand how to make an effective Kabbalah, we need to ask ourselves a few questions. Question number one is, what exactly are we doing? Sounds like a very basic question, but it's potentially the most important one that we can possibly ask ourselves. If we want to be makabel something, we want to make a commitment to change what we're doing, we have to know what it is that we want to change, which is logical, makes sense. We have to know what we're doing. And it can't be just a general thing like, oh, I speak Lashon Hara. Oh, I missed chakras. Oh, I did this. Oh, I did it. Whatever. You can all fill in the blank. In fact, that's the first question on the sheet that we sent out is, what specific behavior or challenge do you want to work on? So acknowledging what you're doing with as much specificity as you possibly can, that's really the first step that you can take to developing this Kabbalah. If you don't have that specific idea or what action you're trying to get rid of, you can't possibly commit to avoiding it. It's not going to work. The more specific an answer you have, the more likely it is that you'll be able to productively address the situation. So aside from the behavior itself, think about it. What's the setting? Where are you? Who are you with when this action comes up? Are you by yourself? Are you with a particular group of people, with one particular person? What time of day is it? Who are you around? All these ideas, trying to pin down very, very specifically exactly what the behavior that you want to change is. That's the first step to actually making a plan to change it. As we said, you can't change something if you don't know what it is. When you're looking at how to change things, you also want to make sure that it's specific. Not specific, it's sustainable, I'm sorry. I'm going to put, I see a request in the chat for the sheet. I'm going to put the sheet up just so people can see it. And if you need a copy of it, I'm happy to email it to you again later. So you want it to be sustainable. Saying that I don't want to talk Lashon Hara ever again, it's a very nice idea. It's a very nice idea. It's a beautiful aspiration. But the question that you have to ask yourself is this something which is sustainable? It makes much more sense to tell yourself, okay, I don't want to talk Lashon Hara anymore, but I'm going to find one particular instance in which I know I usually trip up. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to talk Lashon Hara on my way home from shul on Shabbos morning when I'm walking with this particular friend. You compare the two. One of them is much more sustainable than the other because, first of all, you're making yourself aware of a situation. Secondly, you know that when you get into that situation, it's much more likely that you'll have in mind that, like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm working again. And it just acknowledging that in itself can often give you the boost you need to push through. You want to also understand what your patterns are. Simple identification or even very specific identification isn't necessarily enough. Once you've identified a specific action that you want to work on, you need to understand it also. As we said, we mentioned a few patterns before, a few items in terms of what the setting might be, like where are you, who are you with, etc. But the thing that you also want to pay attention to triggers. You want to pay attention to the things that set you off, your triggers, your reactions. Part of the commitment to avoiding the action question is knowing what the triggers are and how you can either avoid them entirely or work around them. You're going to need to work out a way to react to the potential triggers and the setting in a different way than you have been. This is all part of coming up with a plan. So the example that we gave before, right? This guy has a problem. He's walking home from shul on Shabbos morning, and he knows that he's going to. Usually, he ends up talking Lashon Hara with this person he's walking back with, and you can honestly fill in any number of different settings or different ideas. Different kinds of things that people commonly face. But the idea is going to be the same. So think about it. Right off the bat, there are a few potential triggers there. One is the setting itself, as we mentioned. We don't know necessarily how this whole thing got started off, but at this point, because you're so used to doing it, the setting itself is a trigger. The setting itself is something which prompts the behavior. It's kind of like makes you think to yourself, I know I'm going to do this because that's what I always do. And if a person is just in that habit of accepting that as rational, then they're going to end up doing that. It's going to end up happening. The same thing as we said, the definition of insanity, expecting the different results from the same effort. You want to try to find something to change the dynamic. Either you avoid the setting entirely, you find a different walking partner, add someone else to your walking partnership, discuss the problem with them, go over to the person and say, listen, this is something that I'm struggling with and I'd like to change. Do something to change the dynamic so that the trigger, the setting, is not in itself the same trigger. Even in that example, though, there are a lot more subtle emotional triggers or cognitive triggers, the way we think to ourselves. We mentioned before the idea of, I know I'm going to do this because that's what I always do. What we call that as therapists, we call that a fortune telling or a predictive way of thinking. It's like, this has happened before, therefore I'm destined to repeat the same thing. This is what we call a cognitive distortion. It's not necessarily true that, well, I have done the same thing before and therefore I must follow the same path. If a person is mindful about it, there is the possibility of changing. It's not going to be easy, not by a long shot. But because you may be, by being aware of what that thought is going through your head, you may be able to stop it, reevaluate it, and think about it in a different way, replace the thought with something else. So let's go into this guy's mindset. He may be thinking, what's the point of fighting it? Because I'm going to give into it eventually anyway, as we said before. Another one which comes up a lot with this kind of stuff is when you're in the heat of the moment, when you're walking home with the guy, maybe there's a heter, maybe there's a way to say, okay, this particular way of talking is really allowed, it's l'toyelas. There are all sorts of heterim that a person can kind of drum up when they're in the heat of the moment, when they want to do whatever it is that they're going to do. There are a lot of different things that he can drum up to convince himself that it's okay. So it's, again, the idea that it's happened before and is likely to happen again, that weakens your resolve to struggle against it. This time in particular, you're not necessarily going to be able to struggle or to work as hard towards your goal of not engaging in this way if you feel that it's a done deal and that it's going to happen as it is. So step one, when you want to work on any of these things, when you start being aware of what your thought patterns are, when you start being aware of the need or the interest in working on one particular thing, step one is that you want to set up, that you want to understand what the halachas are. You want to understand clearly what the halachas of the issue that you're struggling with are, so that you know, okay, what do I really have to do teshuva from? There's a lot of misunderstanding about what is halacha, what's not halacha, what's lechatchila, what's not lechatchila. So one suggestion would be to actually learn these things, learn them up by yourself if you're able to. If you're not able to, consult with a competent Rav, consult with somebody who knows these things to figure out exactly what you need to do. Once you have that in mind and you have a clear baseline in terms of what you need to work on or what you want to work on, what you feel is important to work on, then you can start to make your plan. So as we said, so let's talk a little bit about the emotional mindset also. The examples of thoughts and mindset that we spoke about before, so you need to address them in slightly different ways. They're far more than just these two mindsets that we mentioned before, this idea of either it's mutter or I'm going to end up doing it anyway. There are a lot of different ones. So if you look at this, if you look at the sheet that we have up here, so we discussed the first piece here, what specific behavior challenge do you want to work on? It's also important to look at the feelings that you associate with this challenge. Right? Do you feel shame? Do you feel anger? Do you feel upset? When you actually get into the heat of the moment, what are the feelings? Are you excited? What are the thoughts that you associate with having these feelings? Feelings generally prompt thoughts. Feelings are a way that we interpret the world. And these feelings lead us to have certain thoughts. So let's say a person feels shamed, or a person feels that they're just not powerful enough to work on this particular item, then the feeling is going to be shame, and the thought that comes into play is going to be, I am not a powerful person. I'm not capable of working on these things. So that could all be in the heat of the moment. If you're looking at, so thinking about it now, if you look at the next question here, when you look at these thoughts now, when you're not facing the struggle, what do you think of those things? If you've actually done a proper identification of the issue you want to work on, and looking at the thoughts that you've had about the issue in general, are those thoughts accurate? Are these feelings that you need to have? Or can you potentially replace these thoughts with something more true? So let's think about it. What thoughts do you have associated with working on Lashon Hara? The thought that you might have is, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm not strong enough to do it. I'm never gonna be successful. It's a done deal. Forget it. When you look at what thoughts could you replace them with that might be more true? So a person might try, this is a hard thing for me to do, but if I'm specific enough and I'm mindful enough and I get the support that I need, either from myself or from friends or from a mentor or from any number of people, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, it's very possible that I will be able to accomplish what I set out to accomplish if I'm being realistic with myself. And looking at the thought process that way, it's not, we're not trying to fool ourselves. We're not saying, yeah, this is a walk in the park, but but giving yourself a more accurate thought can help you to even accommodate the idea of working on something. Whereas before, it was something that you could, that you may not have even been able to consider seriously. And now, thinking about the specific action, we also want to have a specific goal. What do you want it to look like instead? We want to know what we're working towards. We want to know what we're working for. We want to know where we're going. I mean, if you want to go back to the Teshuva idea, where are you going? Where are you returning to? What do you want to accomplish? So that's a very important thing to have in mind. If anybody's ever read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things that he mentions, I know this is not necessarily the classic Maramakan, but it's important. One of the things that he talks about is beginning with the end in mind. When you begin a project, you have to know what it's going to look like at the end. You have to know what it's going to look like when you finally finish off. So having in mind, so we've done a few things so far. We've discussed what Teshuva really is. It's a process of bringing yourself closer to Hashem, of connecting more closely with that outpouring of bracha that Hashem is constantly sending down to the world. It's not about guilt. It's not about shame. It's just about improving our ability to bring that bracha into the world. We discussed how it works, as we said, the analogy of the laser lens, the idea of focusing that hashbas bracha in a way that works for us and that we're able to receive it. And we spoke also about specifically identifying something that you want to work on, understanding what your thoughts and feelings are surrounding that particular behavior, and the idea of changing thoughts to help you to work towards your goal, which hopefully you've come up with once you've identified the specific behavior. So let's pick on this poor guy who's speaking Lashon Hara on the way home from shul again. He's saying, he's saying, I'm acknowledging that this is a problem. I want to stop talking Lashon Hara with this guy when I'm going home from shul. So what he wants it to look like is, I'm walking home from shul on Shabbos and I'm not talking Lashon Hara. Maybe that it's usually easier actually to replace it with something else, like a positive work, like I would like to discuss A, B, and C. But even saying I don't want to do this anymore, that's beginning with the end in mind. That's having in mind what you want things to look like in the end. And so this is the basic rundown. Now I think we're going to stop here. I think we've got like maybe 3 minutes left on our timer here. But I think it's important to note, if you go around, if anybody wants to go around and do like a survey project and go around to different shuls and listen to different recordings of Rosh Hashanah drashas and Yom Kippur drashas from any number of Rabbanim, from any number of stripes of the community, whether it's Baal Batish, Yeshivish, Hasidish, Modern Orthodox, whatever stripe you want to put in there, the most classic question in drashas around this time of year is, how can I do tshuva? I've gone through so many of them without any real change. Everybody asks that question. It's on everybody's mind. Hopefully, if we're able to at least keep in mind some of these steps and really keep up with them, and it's also important, as I mentioned before, getting support is the single best way to do it. If you have a friend who you want to work on these things with, that's great. If you look at the yeshivas back in Europe, when they had a Musar Vad, it wasn't just one person standing up and talking about different thoughts based on the Musar Sfarim. It was them actually working on a particular mitzvah, on a particular mitzvah, and discussing the challenges that they had and being open with each other and really trying to work out a way that they could put up some sort of a defense against whatever it was they were trying to work on. So if we're able to use these tools and we're able to really make ourselves willing to do that kind of work, then hopefully we'll be able to make ourselves that perfect laser lens and be able to bring down the Hashpas Bracha to the world. We might get kicked off in like 2 minutes or so, but if anybody has any questions or thoughts, they're definitely more than welcome to either put them in the chat right now, or if you want to email it to me, I'm more than happy to answer them. My email is, I'll put it in the chat right here. Actually, people should have it because that's probably how they got the, that's probably how everybody got the link. But this is, I'm more than happy to entertain questions either now until we get checked, or you know, afterwards if you want to email. Floor's open. I just realized I didn't put the, I didn't put that to everybody. Okay, so the email is now in the chat for everybody, whoever wants to see it. Anybody? Is anybody typing? Raise your hand. You can even unmute yourself if you want. I think we're done with that part for now. No? Okay. All right. So I think I'm gonna sign off for now. Thank you so much. If anybody's interested in further discussions about this or any other Hashkafic-based topic, this is a passion of mine. The convergence of Hashkafa and psychology. So anybody who has any suggestions, also aside from questions or feedback, please feel free to email me. Thank you so much. Everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.